Rethinking Heroes, Life After the Military.
I've spent a decade taking a bite out of conspiracy theories, unraveling urban legends, and grappling with worldwide top secret issues.
I've even racked up some of their awards.
Wow, first of all, what a question.
Journalism is about telling the truth, all while ferreting out the bottom line.
I'm a Harrison Hellraiser.
With me, Carrie Harrison, as your guide.
Rethinking Heroes, Life After the Military with Carrie Harrison.
And it is Rethinking Heroes. Carrie Harrison with you, rethinkingheroes.com, where you can get that gift from this radio station to you so that you can save thousands on your meds. Unbelievable. Plus all the other good things we're going to do for you. More will be announced down the road. Well, by now we've all heard of the Wagner Group, a Russian private military company, also known as a PMC. When you hear that acronym, you now know what that means. PMC, it stands for Private Military Company. We used to call them mercenaries, but it's a hell of a lot more elegant. Don't you think, PMC? Yeah, PMC. That's been active, by the way, the Wagner Group, in a number of conflict zones around the world, including Ukraine, Syria, Libya, Mozambique, the Central African Republic, and Sudan. The Wagner Group is believed to have been formed by Yevgeny Prigozhin, a Russian businessman and former hot dog vendor with close ties to the Kremlin. And that's how you go from hot dog vendor to head of mercenary maven. The size of the Wagner Group is difficult to estimate, but it's believed to have as few as 2,000 and as many as 10,000 fighters. Prigozhin's Wagner Group has been accused of a number of human rights abuses, including war crimes and torture, the use of child soldiers, among many, many others. This does not make them unique, by the way, in history, as every country you've ever heard or read about or studied has been accused of exactly the same thing, with the exception of child soldiers, at least here in the West. Germany, yes, when it was not part of the West the way we know it today. The future of the Wagner Group is still a member of guesswork is probably the best way to put it. The group was designated as a transnational criminal organization back in January by both the U.S. and the European Union, and it might be forced to disband. At least that's what we're hearing right now. More likely, the group will continue to operate under a different name, as did Blackwater under Eric Prince. Who can forget Blackwater, which was smartly rebranded as Z Services in 2009, and then again renamed Academy in 2011. You know, you do enough bad things, you just rebrand. It's like Time Warner had so many lawsuits for such bad cable service, it became, ding, Spectrum. And then we all forgot about Time Warner. Same kind of idea with rebranding Blackwater into two other entities. So then will Wagner then become something much more salient and salubrious for all the rest of us. And Blackwater, of course, was renamed after, most recently, Academy, after it was acquired by a group of private investors. So why would the Wagner Group attack Russia? Well, the tension between Wagner and the Russian military grew after Prigozhin claimed the military attacked his troops, saying that there'd been missile attacks on his camps. He went on to say that the Russian military was responsible for the deaths of 2,000 of his soldiers. And later, in a series of audios that were released by Prigozhin himself, he warned the Russian military that their actions would have consequences. He said, quote, "Those who destroyed our lads, those who destroyed the lives of many tens of thousands of Russian soldiers will be punished. I ask that no one offer resistance." Well, wouldn't you imagine that Vladimir Putin must have read about the dangers of relying upon mercenary forces in Machiavelli? It seems impossible that they don't teach Machiavelli in KGB finishing school. But then we're going to find out. Do they not? With us right now via Zoom from Moscow is 21-year-old Russian journalist Mark Luzhkovyi, who's covering the Ukrainian conflict along with Russian-specific geopolitics. Mark is at ground zero in Moscow, where the world's eyes continue to be focused, providing the perspective of a young person buttressed in a war zone. Mark Luzhkovyi, I hope I am not totally hammering your name. I'm doing the best I can here. I want to welcome you to Rethinking Heroes.
You're not, Carrie. You're absolutely not butchering my name, and it's a pleasure to be here once again. Long time no see, as it goes. And you said Moscow is a war zone to which the eyes of the whole world are attached. And I'm I'm not ready to quite agree on that one because, as you may know, Prigozhin's forces, PMC Wagner, it didn't actually reach Moscow, but instead only stopped on the outskirts of Moscow, just around 200 kilometers near it, before ceasing its coup d'etat activities and removing itself to Belarus, a country which is very closely tied to Russia geographically and culturally, and of course politically, since we have a very strong bond between Russia's President Vladimir Putin and the leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. So what we need to know about PMC Wagner before why would it start an armed mutiny and have an open conflict against the Russian government. First of all, let's remember when it all started and what was the reason behind creating the Wagner PMC. Of course, it started back in 2014 when Russia started to cardinally shift its foreign policy with returning Crimean Peninsula, a part of Ukraine at that time, and making it a part of Russia. And of course, this led to an open confrontation with the West, and Russia had to have some sort of a special operation unit to achieve its foreign policy goals in some countries where a direct involvement of Russian forces wouldn't be wanted by Moscow itself, to not attract any problems with international community and the United Nations. And PMC Wagner proved itself to be quite efficient in resolving such problems abroad, especially in Africa, because we all know that Africa as a continent is very rich in natural resources and very unstable because of different tribal, ethnic, and religious conflicts going on there. And what was one of the main achievements which got a lot of fame to Wagner's PMC prior to the start of the current war we have was that his PMC managed to squeeze out French involvement from West Africa. West Africa, of course, had been for decades actually a part of French military operations because Paris used to be a metropole which controlled a lot of African countries. And
Mark Luzhkovyi, I'm just going to jump in for a second because we're going down an awesome rabbit hole, but we do have some limited time here, so I'm just going to bring it back.
Of course.
I just want to establish something first. Because we're in the United States, because we're in the West, we cannot reliably know how freely you're allowed to speak and from what position you may speak. So let's just say that the US and much of the West have blocked Russian broadcasts and outgoing news services. We say that we've done that for our protection, us over here, and also to remove what might be considered propaganda. Rethinking Heroes listeners are savvy. They're definitely going to be following along with curiosity, but we understand that there may be limitations to what you're allowed to say. I don't know if you can say there might be limitations or not, but that would be helpful here.
Of course, there are some limitations. As always, you have them in media, and those limitations include different kind of connotations. As for example, I cannot publicly deny that some territories which got returned to Russia during this war with Ukraine, I cannot deny them being a part of Russia, of course. But I don't deny it myself because I believe that those territories are rightful Russian clay to various historical reasons, which are too deep to dive in them today. And you can disagree on that, of course. And of course, American media and American government being not content with that is one of the reasons behind blocking Russian newscasts in America. But returning back to PMC Wagner, prior to this coup d'etat attempt by Yevgeny Prigozhin, there was an open confrontation between him and Russian Defense Ministry. PMC Wagner, with all its experience and ability to gain ground on the battlefield, it turned out to be quite successful in liberating a couple of major towns in Donbass, and as a result, destroying so much Ukrainian forces that Ukrainian army today, as you can see, is failing on its offensive against Russia on Zaporozhye front. So despite this major achievement by PMC Wagner was denied, basically stripped of ammunition by Russian Defense Ministry because of their open reputational conflict. And Yevgeny Prigozhin publicly on media and on Telegram channels talking bad things about Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, who, of course, was not very happy with his own regiments not succeeding in offensive operations, unlike Yevgeny Prigozhin and his PMC Wagner. It's worth noting, by the way, that Yevgeny Prigozhin is not a military commander. He's a businessman and a public figure who's making all the media PR moves for the PMC. But actually, who commands the unit is Wagner, Dmitry Utkin, and Wagner is his code name because allegedly he has some sympathies to German culture and,
and Richard Wagner, who was also one of the Führer's favorite composers. So it's always, everything is always the Nazis. In this country, in your country, in every country. It always boils down to the great excuse. We're going to get into that in just a second. Let me just reintroduce you. Carrie Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes. You can go to rethinkingheroes.com. Make sure you get our brand new spanking shiny new newsletter. It's an opt-in. We're going to get you all kinds of cool discounts on stuff, plus information we don't dare say on the radio because we have FCC limitations too, and stories that might just shock and horrify. My favorite kind, of course, mystery history, what really happened. You're going to get all of that, so go to rethinkingheroes.com. Right now, via Zoom from Moscow, is 21-year-old Russian journalist who you can hear his English skills are impeccable. He went to the Moscovite version of Harvard in Russia there, and so he is a highly educated guy. His name is Mark Luzhkovyi, and he is covering the Ukrainian conflict along with Russian-specific geopolitics for us right here, right live, and uniquely so. We are talking about the Wagner Group, who they are, Prigozhin versus Putin. What does it mean? Let's talk for a second, Mark Luzhkovyi. What is Vladimir Putin's relationship with Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of the Wagner Group?
Well, they personally know each other since the 1990s, when capitalism in Russia after the fall of Soviet Union started to be the main socio-economic system. And during that time, Yevgeny Prigozhin made his business fortune grow millions of US dollars in 1996. And during that time, Vladimir Putin was a deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, Russia's second capital and second largest city. And then they probably got acquainted, and Yevgeny Prigozhin's business started to grow, so much so that in early 2000s and 2010s, he managed to get himself a lot of contracts in construction with Russian Defense Ministry, which is quite ironic considering the current situation we have today. And he managed to gain so much money and so much connections, it was eligible for him to start a private military company with former Russian servicemen without any bureaucracy you have in armed forces, which actually made it so efficient and so resultative on the battleground. And of course, his relations with Vladimir Putin at that time allowed him to make it happen, and moreover to expand his operations overseas. And when that happened, of course, Vladimir Putin completely denied Russia had any involvement with PMC Wagner, and that, of course, the company itself was Russian, but Russian state had nothing to do with the company. However, just a couple of days ago, this week, actually, Vladimir Putin, he confirmed that from the very beginning of PMC Wagner, it was Russian government who funded it and spent billions of rubles and probably billions of dollars as well on the whole company and the whole thing and the whole operational package they had with themselves. Of course, today, what we see is not very good relations between Vladimir Putin and Yevgeny Prigozhin, since Yevgeny Prigozhin has publicly challenged Vladimir Putin with his armed insurgency. The reason behind that is very simple. Vladimir Putin has very close personal relations with Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. And apart from that, PMC Wagner doesn't have any official status from the legal point of view as well as Yevgeny Prigozhin himself, he doesn't have any official government position. But despite that, we have several thousands of people armed with prior combat experience in different kind of war zones, and they all have only one person who they take orders from. This is Yevgeny Prigozhin, and of course, a lot of influence in one hand without any legal justification and status. It becomes a very hard thing to navigate and to give orders to. And Prigozhin was publicly very critical of different senior Russian officials, including St. Petersburg mayor, the second largest city in Russia and its second capital, Russian Defense Ministry, Russian head of general staff, and other high-ranking military officials.
Mark, let me ask you your assessment of the allegations of human rights abuses committed by the Wagner Group. Is that considered acceptable by the Russian people?
Let me break it down like this. Those accusations, especially those ones you mentioned about child soldiers, they were made against PMC Wagner during their time in Africa. And as we, of course, all know, in Africa, there are a lot of tribal feud kind of conflicts with different kind of atrocities performed by people who are often, for example, Islamic militants like ISIS, Boko Haram, or different sorts of extremists. And when they conduct their operations and take territory, they often rape, kill, and torture local population. And when you have PMC Wagner coming in and acting on the behalf of local government, which pays PMC Wagner money and natural resources in order to stabilize the country, what else can you do when you encounter Islamic terrorists or any other dangerous, violent extremists? You kill them. And sometimes people who have combat experience and even legal experience, criminal experience, being previously in jail, they are not a very pleasant people to fight against. You've got to understand this, Kerry. I think you understand this because imagine if you would see a village burned down completely with people shot dead and raped, and then you have a group of armed guys who know how to defeat these people, and you have some of them alive and begging for their lives. This is a huge ethical question, of course. But
and more deeply, the ethics also beg to, how did they get that way? Who was in there stirring up the pot to begin with? Generally, people get along and are sustenance eaters. They grow their own food. They tend to work fairly well with each other. But I can tell you from this side of the deck, our country, my country, has gone in with many Christian missionaries and trained them in the right way to live, which of course causes all kinds of chaos for people who are then suddenly heathens when they never were. Voodoo witch doctors were always considered for thousands of years as fertility gods. Now, of course, they're drag queens and have to be punished for not being Christian. Real problems. And I think both our countries, in fact, every country has been involved always when colonizing, when going for the minerals. So really, I can't buy into, oh, they're just all animals and they're just eating each other and we have to go in and rescue it. I think there's cause and effect. But that's another conversation for another time because we are out of time. But I have one final question for you, and I really appreciate your coming on, Mark Luzhkovyi, 21-year-old Russian journalist covering the Ukrainian conflict along with Russian-specific geopolitics, with us right now live on Zoom from Moscow. Disbanding the PMC, or disbanding the Wagner Group, much like our January 6th insurrection, as we call it, where nobody was punished. Move along, nothing to see here, have a nice day. It was only an absolute assault on the Capitol. Same thing happened in Moscow, really no punishment. Move along, have a nice day. We don't really hate you anymore. From the Russian side, I mean, we're rolling our eyes here. Are you rolling your eyes there about this?
So what we have to understand is that despite all that happened, the recruitment of PMC Wagner to serve in Africa and Arabic countries is still going on, and you still can apply if you, of course, have a Russian citizenship and know some foreign languages like French or Arabic. The main manpower of PMC Wagner is now in Belarus, and Belarusian parliament is actually voting in favor of a legislation to legalize their status there. And all the PMC centers in Moscow, St. Petersburg, other large Russian cities, they're still functioning and they're still recruiting. And even if PMC Wagner, the current brand, will be closed, we still have all the infrastructure in Africa, and we still have all the infrastructure in Belarus moved into Belarus and legalized there. So name can be whatever, but the manpower, the weapons, the most of weapons, of course, because heavy artillery and heavy weaponry have been transferred to Russian Defense Ministry, but still they have some weapons, modern weapons. They still have people, and those people are experienced and ready to work. And there are a lot of conflicts around the globe which are requiring some people from abroad to come there and to help local governments to, for example, defeat a terrorist insurrection. And PMC Wagner or PMC something, we can see them there. I think my assessment is absolutely 100%, and their story is not over for sure. And this page of history is not turned, at least for now.
I think we should come up with a nice hyphenate and call them Wagner Blackwater. I think that'd be a lovely new name, and we could all just glow with that. That won't mean anything to you, maybe, but just my particularly appalling sense of humor. I want to thank you, Mark Luzhkovyi. Thank you so much for being brave. Thank you for showing up here in the U.S. As a young man. And I sound like your grandfather. As a younger person, 21. I am over 21, clearly here. Showing up and being brave and putting forth your perspective, your worldview, your Weltanschauung in front of us so that we can hear what you see, because we are not there and we are not allowed to be there. So hopefully you'll come and visit with us again and bring us more insights and observations. This issue, this conflict is not going away anytime soon. So I very much appreciate your having participated with us today on Rethinking Heroes.
Thank you so much, Harry. Have a good broadcast.
Thanks. You too, my friend. That was 21-year-old Russian journalist Mark Luzhkovyi, covering Ukrainian conflict along with Russian-specific geopolitics. He's done TV and radio and other things, and as a young guy is able to navigate their system there and found a way to break free so that he could talk to us. Not an easy task from this side either, trust me. Well worth the get.
Listen while it's still legal.
Rethinking Heroes with Carrie Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.